people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And that's what we've been talking about, the fact that when Jesus came into the world, he was that light that Isaiah talked about. Hundreds of years before Jesus was born, Isaiah said there was going to be a light coming into the darkness. Now, as we've said over the past 2 weeks, we could talk about light and dark in terms of good and evil, and sure, maybe that's part of what's there. But what Isaiah was talking about when he used those terms light and darkness was something a lot more significant than that. And when Isaiah talks about people walking in darkness, he's really talking about people living out their lives in darkness, living out their lives in confusion, doing life without a real sense of who God is or what God wants from them or what they should be doing, just kind of filling their days, filling their time. They don't have a lot of hope. They don't have any hope. And so the darkness is like despair. And the darkness is so dark, and I've struggled to communicate this over the past couple of weeks. The darkness is so dark that people don't even realize that it's dark. Last week I was reminded of a song by Arcade Fire, and there's this lyric that says, I'm living in an age that calls darkness light. I thought, that's it. I mean, it's just so dark that people think the darkness is like, well, I'm just used to this. This is just the way things are. The darkness is light. But in that darkness, in that confusion comes the true light. And Jesus calls himself the light of the world. Now that's a pretty, boastful thing to say, except that it was true. He comes into the world and says, I am the light of the world. I am that light that Isaiah told you about hundreds of years ago. And I'm coming to bring light to darkness, and those who follow me will walk in the light. And then Jesus also says to his followers, you are the light of the world. Which one is it, Jesus? Are you the light? Are we the light? How does this work? And the answer is both. He is the light of the world, and he has called us, those of us who are followers of Jesus, to carry his light into the world. And so I've tried to encourage you and challenge you a little bit over the course of the past 2 weeks to think about how we celebrate Christmas. Are we celebrating this as little lights in this world? And really, I'm just talking to you if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus. I'm talking to you if you're not a follower of Jesus. You're off the hook on this. But we talked about it our first week, just the fact that you don't have to be a Christian to celebrate Christmas. And so those of us who are followers of Jesus, do we carry light into the darkness? Do we celebrate this holiday any differently than everybody else? Or do we go in for all the same stuff, the consumerism and the decorations and the tree and the lights, and we kind of edge Jesus out of the mix there? And so I hope that you've been thinking about that and really, thinking about how you celebrate the season. Does that reflect that you are a follower of Jesus Christ? This morning I want to talk to you a little bit about the messiness of Christmas, the messiness of the first Christmas and the messiness of several subsequent Christmases. I thought it was wonderful that we were up here trying to sing Silent Night while furniture was being moved in the background. That's not supposed to happen, right? It was Silent Night, and you hear all this racket behind you. That's just life. Life is messy. And that very first Christmas was a very messy time. But before we get to that and the passage of Scripture that Michelle read for you, I feel compelled to tell you a story. I don't necessarily want to share this story with you, but I think it's going to be a pretty good example of what I'm trying to talk about today. I want to tell you about how I became a pastor, how this thing happened to me, okay? And I'll try to tell you the short version because, frankly, it's not that interesting of a story. But I was going to a Bible college, Philadelphia Biblical University, or whatever it's called now. I'm not quite sure. But at the time, it was called Philadelphia Biblical University. I was going there. I was studying the Bible. And as I was there, my fellow students and professors and friends who knew I was in college would say, oh, okay, you're in a Bible college. Are you going to be a pastor? No. That's not my plan. Were you going to go to seminary after you're done your undergrad? Yeah. Were you going to be a pastor? No. And it's like people didn't believe me when I said that. And what made things more complicated is that I was working part-time as the youth director at my home church, and every once in a while I'd have a chance to stand up and preach and speak, and people would be like, oh, you're going to be a pastor one day. No, I'm not. That was not my plan, and people never believed it. I was like, no, really, I don't want to be a pastor. Then why are you going to Bible college? Why do you want to go to seminary? I don't know, I just wanted to learn the Bible. Is that such a bad thing? And so I was very reluctant to do this thing of becoming a pastor because, frankly, you can do a lot of church stuff and not be a pastor, right? You can work with kids, you can work with adults, you can do Bible studies, you can do all these things, and you're not called pastor yet. But as soon as somebody calls you pastor, it's like the level of expectation just skyrockets. You know what I mean? And I would get introduced to people sometimes. Oh, here's our youth pastor. I said, no, I'm not a youth pastor. I'm a youth director. Because I didn't want the burden of that label. I mean, can you imagine what that's like? What if you went into work the next day and said, we're going to make you the pastor of IT or the pastor of whatever, sales or whatever it is. Okay, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But still, can you imagine being called pastor? I didn't want that. Because I felt like as long as I wasn't a pastor, I could still get away with a lot of stuff, right? Hey, I'm just, a normal guy, and I could kind of do this and that. And I'm not a pastor, but as soon as you become a pastor, people expect things from you. And so I did not want that and had no interest in becoming a pastor. So I finally graduated from PBU. It took me a little bit longer than most people to get my degree. I should be like a doctor twice over by now. But anyway, I did eventually finish, and I had a job, and that situation wasn't great. And so I was kind of looking for ways that I might be able to use my degree without becoming a pastor. And so I started looking at church jobs, working with kids, working with youth, sent out some applications, went on some interviews. And as I was searching for these kind of jobs where I could actually use my degree, I saw the listing. They were looking for a children's director at a church called Bethlehem Church. And the job looked great, except I assumed it was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's called Bethlehem Church. And I didn't want to make the commute out there every day. And so I kind of put that one on the back burner. And then Holly, my wife, said, wait a minute. It's called Bethlehem Church, but it's right in Thornton. It's in the greater Westchester area. I said, oh, well, I'll give that a try. So I almost missed this one. And so I applied. I sent in my application, sent in my resume. And this is something that... Be grateful that you don't have to experience something like this in your life. It's so weird. When you interview for a church job, it's like you have to interview with a whole committee of people. Maybe some of you have had a similar experience where it's not like a one-on-one interview, but it's like a whole committee of people. You have to sit there and be grilled by each one of them. And they're all friendly because they're Christians, but they're grilling you a little bit, right? And so I'm in this situation. I had 2 interviews. The first one was a preliminary interview just to see if they were going to give me a real interview. So they just had 2 guys come out to kind of test the waters with me, and then I came back out, and it's the senior pastor, and it's the head of this, head of that, head of this, head of that. I was like, okay, whatever. And so we did the interview, and it went fine. Went through all that. And as I was leaving, I got out to the parking lot, got in my car, turned the headlights on, and there were 2 deer right in front of the car. And I was like, whoa, I guess I can't drive just yet. And I'm not used to seeing those here in Southern Delco, like a deer just jumping out at you. But as I was waiting for the deer to move, I had this experience, and this is a little bit strange, but I felt I heard God telling me, I want you here. And I'm not somebody who's had a lot of those experiences, like, God speaking like a Moses experience where God talked to Moses through this burning bush and this miraculous. I haven't had a lot of those experiences, but I felt like God was saying, I want you here. And so it was about Christmas time. This was back in 2007, I want to say, Christmas 2007. And I think it was Christmas Eve, the 23rd, that I got a call from the church that said, we'd love to have you come out. And I was really excited about the opportunity. I was going to be the director of children's ministry, not pastor anything, but the director of children's ministry. I'd already said, no, I'm not going to be a pastor. I'm not going to apply for any job that has pastor in the title, but I can be the director of children's ministry. And so I go out, and my very first Sunday, as I'm about to be introduced, the head of that hiring committee stops me in the hallway and says, by the way, we're going to call you Pastor Josh because we want to make you the pastor of a children's ministry. And it's really for tax purposes, but it'll be fine. And he walks away. First off, I had no idea what for tax purposes. I still don't know what that meant. I was like, do I have a say in the matter here? And so moments before I'm introduced, it's like, okay, welcome, Pastor Josh and his wife Holly, and everybody applauds. And I'm like, okay, we're in it now. It was a total mess. It's not what I planned. It's not what I wanted. It's what I've been resisting for a long time. And all of a sudden, somebody throws that label on me. I was like, what is this? And it just got messier. I started the job, and now I'm not just running the children's ministry. Now I'm thrust into this pastoral staff, this pastoral team with 2 other pastors who were like real pastors. And here's me like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And so, and they'd just gone through a lot of transitions in their staff, and it was a messy time, and people weren't, kind of gelling yet, and it took some time to build up a good, relationships among the staff, and the whole thing it wasn't supposed to happen that way. That's not how you become a pastor, right? There should be like a robe and a ceremony and a Bible and somebody, I don't know. Shouldn't there be something more than somebody stopping in the hallway and say, yeah, for tax purposes, you're a pastor now. But that's how this thing happened to me. And I don't know quite how to explain what happened from there. It's like eventually I gave into it. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you that I made a decision. Say, all right, if they're going to call me pastor, I'm going to start acting like one. That never really happened. just as the days went by and as the years went by, I just was like, okay, I give in. I'll do this thing. And so being that pastor there and having that experience and learning the things, because you got to play catch up if they're going to call you a pastor. Better start reading some books and learning what that's all about. So we did that. And then out of that came Hope Community Church. And so I feel like it's only fair for you to know, none of this was part of my plan. But I believe and I hope that all of this was part of God's plan. I'm sure, in fact, I know for a fact that several of you have gone through similar times in your life where you've just had a mess. Things are, happen the way, and you're like, things aren't supposed to be happening this way. This isn't how it's supposed to happen. This isn't what I planned for myself. This isn't what I planned for my life. And then out of that mess comes something that you feel like, yeah, this is what was supposed to happen all along. Now, at the time when I was going through those years, that 1 year, 2 year, 3 or 5 years of mess of my life, I didn't know I didn't know where God was, but now I'm here and I realize this is where God wanted me all along. Can you relate to that? Sometimes the mess revolves around a broken relationship, or whether that's a romantic relationship or a family relationship, or you lose a job, or you don't get a job you thought was a sure thing, and there are all these messes that happen in real life. And then something positive ends up happening. Maybe even God's will from your life comes out of that time of mess. And so, as I mentioned to you before, I believe that very first Christmas when Jesus was born, the first Noel, that was a really messy scene. Now, the fact is some of the carols that we sing kind of sanitize and gloss over the messiness of what was going on that first Christmas. We're talking about a baby being tender and mild and sleeping in heavenly peace. And I think in Away in a Manger, there's that line, no crying did the baby Jesus make. And we see the cards with the nativity scene and Joseph and Mary and the wise men, all this stuff. And it's like, we could say that now. But in the moment, this was a very messy, messy thing. It starts with this virgin girl who was engaged to be married to Joseph, and it seemed like, from what we can gather, they wanted to get married, and they were looking forward to that, and all of a sudden God says to her, guess what? You know how you had certain plans for your life? You're going to marry this guy, have a nice little family, do this, do that? I'm scrapping that. You're highly favored, is what the angel says to her. You're going to be the mother of God's son. Say, what? And you know what? If this was something that God was going to do, shouldn't he have gone to Mary's parents and said, okay, or at least to the dad, said, by the way, your daughter's about to be pregnant, but it's totally cool. It's from God. Or going around to the neighborhood and let them know, you're going to see this unwed woman. She's going to get pregnant, but it's God's son. It's a holy thing. Don't judge her. Don't put her to shame. That didn't happen. Thankfully, and fortunately, God did let Joseph in on the whole thing eventually. Joseph first said, okay, you're pregnant. We've never been together. We're not married. I'm just going to, end this engagement quietly and not bring public shame to you. But then the angel Gabriel did speak to him in a dream and said, nope, her story checks out. The child that she has conceived really is from God. And Joseph was challenged to do something that, frankly, wasn't a part of his plan. This just messed everything up for them. Those of you who are married or in that engagement period, where you're thinking about, this is the kind of house we're going to get, this is the kind of life we're going to live, it was all gone. And in that moment, Mary had to say, okay, let God's will be done. I'm the Lord's servant. And Joseph had to do the same thing. Joseph had to say, all right, I'm going to put my plans, just throw them out, and let's do this new thing. And Joseph, I feel like he doesn't get a lot. We talk about Mary and how wonderful she was, and we should, because she was wonderful, but Joseph was wonderful too. He legally adopted a child that wasn't his son. And back in those days, your firstborn son, that was a big deal. You gave him a lot of rights, a lot of privileges, and he gave those all to someone who wasn't biologically related to him. He was willing to do that. And so if this whole scene wasn't messy enough, the emperor decides that he's going to call a census because he wants everybody taxed appropriately. He wants to get a lot of money for the Roman Empire. And so instead of sending something out in the mail or telling people to go online because that didn't exist, he says, everybody, you need to go back to your town of origin. And so here's Joseph. He has married Mary. She is pregnant. Bible tells us the details. They did not consummate the marriage until after the child was born. And so I'm sure that made their honeymoon awkward. But then they have to go to Bethlehem. They have to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Very long journey. We kind of assume they took a donkey or something. Bible doesn't say. And they get there, and there's no place for them to stay. A lot of people were from Bethlehem originally, and so there's no room at the inn. You know the deal, right? If you've seen a Charlie Brown Christmas, you know that's what happens. There's no room at the inn. And this, again, we look back and I think, it was God's perfect plan. In that moment, put yourself in that situation. This woman, who's very pregnant, starts to go into labor. You're Mary, you're Joseph, what do you do? Now, I tend to see this from Joseph's perspective because I'm a guy. I'm a husband. I've had some kids now, and I know it's like, okay, my wife is about to go into labor. God, this is your son. Hook us up with something here. God, if this is really you, if this is really your plan, give us a nice room, right? A nice place, maybe a midwife or two, somebody to help, or a doctor. Come on, God. Where are you in all this? The Bible doesn't tell us what was going on in Joseph's mind or Mary's mind. We know they were good people. I'm just saying, what would you be thinking in that situation? This is God's son. He's got you can't help us out here? And so finally, they find a place to go. Where is it? It's a barn. All right? Again, we have this holy, tender, and mild scene, and it's, how perfect. That's disgusting. You know what I mean? You're with animals, and, you like to be in a pretty clean place when somebody's giving birth, right? It was dirty. It was smelly. There was animals. You know the smells that come along with animals, right? And so this baby is about to be born. And here's Joseph, never been with this woman, if you know what I mean. He's got to deliver this baby. I'm sure his carpentry skills paid off then. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. The panic, the mess. Back in those days, it was a miracle if both mother and child survived, and now it's up to a carpenter to deliver this baby. God, where are you in this mess? And the baby's born, and he's healthy. And I don't know if, no crying he makes. I think he probably cried, I think there was, I don't know. I had the experience, and I was blessed to be able to be there both times that my wife gave birth to our two children, and it's a messy experience even in a hospital. There's stuff you don't want to see this stuff. And so there's Joseph, and it's all happening, and it's on you, buddy. Mary and Joseph, it's it. And so they deliver. This child is born. Both mother and child survive, thank God. Whew. Where do we put them? We don't have the bassinet set up yet. Okay, let's use this. Talk about a manger. It's a feeding trough. It's where animals ate their food. How do you feel right now if you're Mary and Joseph? This is the Son of God. We're putting him in a feeding trough. Is God going to punish us, or what is going on? But they do that. Where else are they going to put him? And then you would think, this is the Son of God. This is a holy event. This is a big deal. You would think that maybe God would inform some really important people that they would come and show up and worship the king. I don't think that Mary and Joseph were expecting any visitors, but if somebody was going to visit them on this blessed occasion, it should be someone important. It should be like the town rabbi or the town matriarchs and patriarchs and the Pharisees. And here's Jesus. He's born into the world. Here comes the light of the world. So we expect to see some important people coming, and they're wearing their fine clothes, and we're here to worship because God has let us know that his son has been born, and so we're going to come and we're going to worship Jesus. But those important people didn't show up. Who did show up? Well, God's angels had informed some shepherds about the whole thing. Right? Again, if you've seen Charlie Brown Christmas, you know the story. And so the angels appeared to these shepherds who were keeping watch over their flocks by night and said, hey guys, guess what's happened? You got to go see this thing. And so they go. And shepherds, we're not talking about a high class of people here, all right? I'm not sure, if you're a shepherd, I'm not trying to offend you. But back in those days, they worked with animals. They were outdoors a lot. They weren't the cleanest type people. They weren't highly respected folks. It was kind of a lowly career. And you've just gone through this experience. You're Mary, you're Joseph. You've done this thing. And now it's like, honey, there's some people who want to see you and the child. Is that okay? They're strangers. They're shepherds. Can they come say hi to Jesus? Okay. If you're Mary or Joseph, aren't you trying to protect that child? We don't know these guys. We don't know these people. What's going on here? And so it's shepherds who come to visit the king, to visit baby Jesus. And then later on, we're told about the wise men or the magi. And we have that, that song, We Three Kings. Do you know that song? It's a pretty popular Christmas carol. Well, they weren't kings. The Bible doesn't talk about them being kings. It talks about them being magi or magicians. And they come to visit baby Jesus. And some people think, well, that was about when he was 2 years old. And some people think, no, it was that night. So we're not really sure what happened. We do know that they had gotten themselves to a home somewhere by the time the wise men come. We know that much, or the Magi come. But the Magi, these guys who traveled, and we assume there were three. I may have even said there were three of them. We don't know how many there were. We just know that they brought three gifts. Okay? And so they come, but they're not even the right race as Jesus. They're not even the right religion. They don't even know about the God of Israel. I mean, they know a little bit. They've read about it, but they're not followers of the one true. They're sorcerers. They're pagans. Can I put it that way? We don't use that term a lot today, but you know what I mean? Back in those days, there was like, okay, here, we're the Jews, we're the chosen people. They're the Gentiles. Ick. And here come these Gentiles, these sorcerers, the magicians, and they're there to worship him. It's like, this is a really messy, what's going on here? God, you couldn't have sent somebody important to come visit your son? And so instead of this, clean, pristine image of these fine people coming, we get a mess. I mean, this is the kind of thing that really bothers me. I don't have OCD, but maybe I do a little bit. It's like, look at these candles. This is like they're all half used, and this one was clearly broken off, and the wicks are on equal lengths. And here's the crowd coming to worship Jesus. Oh, beautiful. Isn't that nice? Just wedge them in there. This one isn't even the right. Some of these are tapered, some of them not. It's not clean looking. It's not pretty looking. It's messy. I remember back, this was years ago when I was a kid going to church. The church I went to, they had these candle holder things. I don't even know what to call them. But an acolyte would come up and light the candles. And one day I realized that those candles weren't candles at all. There were these tubes filled with the fluid in a little wick. And I was like, oh, that's why they never burn down. That's why they never look messy, because they're fake. And we do that a lot in Christianity. We want to clean things up. We want to sing Silent Night and talk about a tender and mild thing and their baby, no crying he makes. It's like, whoa, life is messy. All right? We learn that every week here at Barnstormers, don't we? We come in, we don't know what to expect. And so I feel like it's not fair that too many of us Christians try to polish over the messiness. Because let's be honest, all of us have some mess in our lives. Some of us have a lot of mess in our lives. All right? And that mess could be related to a job or losing a job or some broken relationships, but all of us have mess in our lives. And when you look at Jesus, he didn't come and he wasn't worshipped and praised by people who were dignified and refined. He came into a messy situation. The Son of God, God leaves. I mean, it's God in the flesh. He's not just God, somebody's equal with God. He comes into a messy, messy world filled with broken people. It doesn't look pristine. But that's the world that Jesus enters into. And so I want you to think about a couple things right now. If you feel like some aspects, some arenas of life are a mess for you right now, don't worry about it. Because maybe, just maybe, God is at work in that mess. All right? Not necessarily, because sometimes we make our own messes just through our own bad decisions and all this, but maybe God is, just like he did on that first Christmas, maybe he is at work in that mess. And 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, you'll be able to look back and say, wow, I'm right where God needed me to be today. Felt weird at the time, felt like a mess at the time, but this is what God wanted. And if you're experiencing some kind of hardship, it's like when you see the ministry of Jesus as he grows up and ministers to people, he doesn't wait for people to clean up their lives and clean up their messes before they can follow him, before they can ask him for things. He meets with people right where they are. He doesn't say, okay, I'm going to call my first disciples. Okay, you 12, you're going to be my disciples. You need to spend 3 years at college, get to know the Old Testament really well, try to clean yourselves up, look dignified, and then you can be my followers. Clean up all the relationship issues in your life, get those fixed, and then you can follow me. No. He says, hey, you guys, you broken people with your messed up lives, come follow me. And Jesus says he is the light in the world, and anyone who follows him will enter into that light along with Jesus. All right? And so the other thing I'm encouraging you to think about is the fact that if you've got a mess going on right now, you can invite Jesus into that mess. And I know that sounds like preacher talk. What does that actually mean? That means you're allowed to pray to God. You're allowed to pray and ask Jesus to help you. And give Jesus an opportunity to answer that prayer, to clean up that mess or bring you clarity in the midst of your mess. You're allowed to do that. But finally, I want you to think about those first people who came to worship the Son of God. Okay? Maybe they didn't look that important. Maybe they weren't much. But they came, and they did. They did catch that light. They met Jesus on his first, where he was born, the first Noel. And they took that light into the world. Now, we don't know much about what the wise men, the Magi, did, but we do know that those shepherds went out and told other people what they had seen. And so the information about Jesus kind of spreads in these waves, and there was a lot of people in this first wave who just were going, hey, he's been born. He hasn't done anything yet, but the Son of God, the Messiah that we've been waiting for, he's been born. And those shepherds went out, and maybe they didn't feel qualified to be followers or qualified to be light bearers, qualified to bring light into the world. Maybe they didn't feel up to that challenge. It didn't really matter. I don't think any of them that night when they were looking at their sheep were thinking, I hope an angel shows up and tells us to go see Jesus and then we can go share the news with other people. They weren't planning to do that. But they just had this experience. The angels show up, it's a miraculous thing, go see the Son of God, and then they go and they tell people about it. And that's what they did. And so they took the light of Jesus and they went out and they didn't have all the details of what has Jesus done. He hasn't done anything, he's just been born. But they went out and shared the message. The King has arrived, the Savior we've been waiting for. He has arrived. And they shared that message with others. It's a really, really funny thing. It's about 3 or 4 years ago, I met a man from Bethlehem, not Bethlehem, PA, first Noel, Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. And he was a Christian. Now, Middle Eastern guy, looked like a Middle Eastern guy. And he told me, he said, a lot of people come up to him and say, well, when did you convert to Christianity? And he said, well, my family, we've been Christians for generations going back. We go back to the shepherds, spreading the word. I was like, are you serious? That's awesome. These guys, 2,000 years ago, these shepherds went out. They weren't, they maybe, like I said, maybe they didn't feel qualified to be light bearers, carrying the light. Maybe they didn't feel like they were lights of the world, but they were. They were just put in that position. They were used by God in that powerful way. And that light, it spread. Catching fire, right? We're not talking about Katniss. We're talking about the fire caught on in a wonderful way. There's something very strange that Jesus said in his ministry. And honestly, we're still not sure what he meant by this. He says this in the Gospel of Luke, I believe. He says, I have come to catch the world on fire, and how I wish it was already started. And I think he's talking about this kind of thing. Spreading the message. I might be wrong, but I think that's what he was talking about. I'm coming into this world, I'm bringing my light, I'm bringing my fire, and I want it to spread. And so you may feel the same way as I did about becoming a pastor, as the shepherds did about becoming these light bearers. Maybe you don't feel qualified to be a light in this world. Maybe you think, that's good for the religious people and all that, and they can be lights of the world, whatever that means. They could try to figure that out, but I'm just a regular person. I'm not doing that. Maybe you don't feel qualified. Guess what? Join the club. None of us feel qualified because none of us are qualified. God doesn't choose us because we're so great. He chooses us because we're so normal. Because we're so like everybody else. And then he gives us, in the midst of our mundane lives, he gives us something incredible to do. You can be a light in this world. And so I want you to think about that. Earlier I said, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're off the hook. You don't have to be a light of the world. Well, maybe you're on the hook. Maybe you don't want to think of yourself as a Christian. Maybe you're not ready to think of yourself as a follower of Jesus. But guess what? Maybe you are anyway. Maybe Jesus has called you to be his light anyway. And so let's go with it, right? Let's go into this world. And we may not, know everything there is to know about the Bible or theology or have all our Bible stories down straight. But if Jesus has done something in your life, if you've experienced something, then tell somebody else. That's all the shepherds did. They didn't bring up, their Old Testament and start preaching to people, this, that, and the other. They said, guess what we experienced? And that's the most powerful way to spread the light of Jesus, is not by preaching at people, but by sharing your experiences with others. And so as here we are, we're in Christmas week, we're getting into it. You're going to see people this week, probably. You're going to have family over. You're going to connect with friends. Why not do that very thing? Share something about Jesus. I know it's awkward. It's awkward for all of us. It's messy for all of us. Life is messy. All right? But we have the opportunity to be a part of something that Jesus started. That's a privilege. I know it's a burden, but it's also a privilege. And so I want you to think about that over the next few days. And I'm encouraging you, and yes, I'm challenging you. When you're interacting with those people over Christmas, when you're at dinner, when you're seeing people, when you're opening presents, if God lays something on your heart to share it. Because this is the way that the message of Jesus has spread for the past 2,000 years. It's not because people like me stand up and talk to a group. It's because the people go out and share with their friends and loved ones what Jesus has done for them. And so you have this wonderful opportunity, this wonderful burden, this wonderful gift to be a light in the world.